On Thanksgiving, my millionaire son surprised me with a lake house I never knew existed. Shocked, I said, "What house?" As the truth unfolded, my gold-digging daughter-in-law slowly approached. A simple Thanksgiving question. That's all it took to shatter the fragile reality I'd carefully constructed around my life. For 2 grueling years, I'd been a ghost in my own existence, scrubbing floors for a janitor's wage, stretching my blood pressure medication thinner than my worn winter coat. I told myself it was fleeting, a temporary hardship before a better tomorrow. My son, David, a titan at 35, had forged a tech empire from sheer grit, employing over 200. I swelled with pride, even as our conversations dwindled to curt updates on client dinners and boardroom battles. 3 years had passed since his father's death, and David had buried his grief in work. I understood. Everyone carries their sorrow differently. That Thanksgiving morning, a strange chill clung to my small house. Hours I'd poured into preparing his favorite dishes, knowing the grocery bill would mean a week of skipped lunches. My tiny kitchen overflowed with pots and pans, a testament to my yearning for perfection. For months it had been since I'd seen him in person. When David strode through my door, the sheer expense of him hit me first. A watch, shoes, a casual sweater, each piece likely worth more than my monthly rent. Trailing him was Victoria, his wife of 3 years, enveloped in a cream coat that whispered of glossy magazine pages, her blonde hair impossibly perfect against the November wind. "Mom, the house smells incredible," David said, his hug brief, almost perfunctory, before he turned to Victoria's coat. She offered a polished smile, the kind she always wore, but her eyes, I noticed, seemed to be coldly calculating. At the dinner table, I listened as David spoke of West Coast expansion, Victoria chiming in with tales of European getaways and lavish home renovations. Each detail was a sharp reminder of the chasm widening between our lives. Then, as I reached for the pumpkin pie, David leaned back, a relaxed smile on his face. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask you something that's been on my mind." I set the pie server down, my full attention on him. "How are you enjoying the lake house I gave you 2 years ago? I know you've always loved being near the water." The words struck me like a blast of ice water. I stared, my mouth slightly agape, the phrase lake house, a foreign object in my mind. Lake house! My heart hammered against my ribs, confusion swirling. "What lake house, honey?" I never received any lake house." David's smile faltered, his gaze darting to Victoria, who had gone utterly still beside him. "The house on Lake Morrison. I had it transferred to your name for your birthday 2 years ago. Don't you remember?" I shook my head slowly, a sudden dizziness claiming me. "David, I would remember receiving a house. I've never gotten anything like that. Are you sure you're not thinking of someone else?" Victoria abruptly rose, her napkin fluttering to the floor. "Oh, I've just remembered," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "I need to make a phone call about tomorrow's appointment. Excuse me." She moved quickly towards the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, but her urgency felt wrong, a knot tightening in my stomach. David was frowning now, his businessman's mind already dissecting the puzzle. "Mom, that's impossible. I specifically had my assistant handle all the paperwork. The deed should have been mailed to you, and there were supposed to be monthly maintenance payments set up too." Monthly payments. My legs felt weak beneath me. "What monthly payments?" "The $1,500 I've been sending you every month to help with expenses." My assistant assured me you were receiving everything. The room began to tilt. $1,500 a month for 2 years. That was $36,000. Enough to have changed everything. Enough to buy my medication, fix my car, erase the constant anxiety over every grocery purchase. I gripped the edge of the table, my voice trembling. "David, I swear to you, I haven't received any monthly payments. I've been struggling to pay for my blood pressure medication. Last month, I had to choose between groceries and my electric bill." David's face went white. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's impossible. I have receipts, bank transfers. Everything should be documented." From the kitchen, Victoria's voice was a low, urgent murmur, indistinguishable words. My hands began to tremble as the full, sickening weight of the situation settled over me. "Show me," I whispered. "Show me the paperwork." David was already on his phone, scrolling through emails with growing desperation. "I have copies of everything at home, the deed transfer, the payment confirmations." "Mom, if you haven't been getting this money, then where has it been going?" We both turned towards the kitchen. Victoria's voice had ceased. The silence that followed was heavy, guilt-laden. I rose on unsteady legs and walked to the doorway. Victoria stood with her back to us, phone pressed to her ear, but she wasn't speaking anymore. When she heard our footsteps, She spun around, her face flushed. Everything okay? David asked, but his tone had hardened, the voice he used in business meetings when he suspected dishonesty. Victoria's smile was painfully strained. Of course, just confirming our dinner plans for tomorrow. But I saw it now. The guilt etched across her features, the way her eyes couldn't quite meet mine, the nervous fidgeting with her wedding ring. Victoria, David said slowly, do you know anything about the lake house paperwork? You helped coordinate with my assistant on several things around that time. The silence that followed stretched into an eternity. Victoria's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. In that moment, looking at her face, I knew. Somehow, some way, she had taken what was meant for me. This Thanksgiving, the one I'd poured my heart into, was about to become the day my family imploded. The silence in my small dining room was a taut wire, vibrating, ready to snap. Victoria stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her perfectly manicured hands clasped so tightly her knuckles shone white. David stared at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before, a horrifying blend of confusion and mounting suspicion. Victoria, I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. Where is my lake house? She swallowed hard, her eyes flitting between David and me. There must be some misunderstanding. Maybe the paperwork got lost in the mail. Or perhaps there was an error at the bank. But even as she spoke, the lie was forming, brittle and transparent in her eyes. 15 years as a janitor, cleaning offices long after everyone left, teaches you to read people. When you're invisible, you see a lot. You hear everything when they talk around you. Victoria was lying, and she was doing a terrible job of it. David pulled out his phone again. I'm calling Rebecca, my assistant. She handled all of this personally. No, wait! Victoria cried, stepping forward. Maybe we should discuss this privately first. Your mother has been through a lot, and I don't want to upset her more if this is just a simple mix-up. A cold anger began to calcify in my chest. Upset me more? I'd been living on crackers and peanut butter while she flaunted designer clothes and took European vacations. Yet, I kept my voice calm. Victoria, honey, I think we're past worrying about upsetting me. I need to know where my house is. David was already dialing. Within seconds, a woman's voice. Rebecca, it's David. I need you to pull up the paperwork for the lake house I purchased for my mother 2 years ago. A pause. Then Rebecca's voice, clear as a bell through the speakerphone. Of course, Mr. Harrison. The property at 1247, Lake Morrison Drive. The deed was transferred to Margaret Harrison on November 15th, 2 years ago. I have copies of all the signed documents. My heart pounded. That was my name, my address for the paperwork, but I had never signed anything. And the monthly payments? David asked. All processed as requested. $1,500 transferred on the first of every month to the account you specified. Account holder named Margaret Harrison. Routing number ending in 4782. The blood drained from my face. I don't have an account ending in 4782. My account ends in 9156. David's eyes snapped to Victoria. Rebecca, can you read me the full account number? As Rebecca rattled off the numbers, I watched Victoria's composure crumble. It wasn't my account. It wasn't even close. Rebecca, David said, his voice dangerously quiet. Who provided you with this account information? Your wife, sir. Mrs. Harrison called me in December 2 years ago and said there had been a change in your mother's banking information. She provided the new routing and account numbers and asked me to update all the records. The phone slipped slightly in David's hand. Victoria made a small, desperate sound. And the deed, David continued. Where was it supposed to be mailed? The address Mrs. Harrison provided. Let me see. 847, Maple Street, apartment 2B. I'd never lived on Maple Street. I'd been in the same small house for 10 years. David hung up the phone. The silence that followed was deafening. When he looked at Victoria, his face was completely blank, a terrifying void that was worse than any rage. Explain, he said simply. Victoria's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of panic, not remorse. David, you have to understand. My parents were about to lose their house. They're elderly, and my father's medical bills were bankrupting them. I just borrowed the money temporarily. Borrowed? I whispered. You mean stole? No. Victoria's voice rose. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. And the lake house, it's not like you were using it. My family needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet. Something cracked inside my chest. Not like I was using it. Victoria, I said, my voice shaking with a quiet fury. I've been working double shifts to afford my medication. I've been eating one meal a day to make my grocery money stretch. I haven't been able to turn my heat above 60 degrees because I can't afford the electric bill. David stared at his wife as if she were a stranger. Victoria, my mother could have died. What if she'd had a medical emergency and couldn't afford treatment? But she didn't. Victoria said desperately. She's fine. She's healthy. My father has diabetes and heart problems. He needed the money more. The sheer callousness of her words was a physical blow. Fine, healthy. I thought of the nights I'd lain awake, chest tight with stress, wondering how I'd pay for my next prescription. The times I'd stood in the grocery store, calculator in hand, putting items back because I couldn't afford them. Where is my house now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Victoria wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her designer makeup smearing. My parents are living there. And my brother's family. They've been renovating it, making improvements. With my money, David said flatly. Victoria nodded miserably. I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. For 2 years, I told myself David was too busy, that his success meant he didn't need to worry about his mother. I'd been proud of his independence, even as I struggled alone. All this time, he thought he was taking care of me. He thought I was comfortable and secure. Mom, David said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm so sorry. I thought you were okay. I thought you had everything you needed. I looked at my son, the successful man who'd worked so hard to build a better life, and saw the little boy who used to promise he'd take care of me when he grew up. He tried to keep that promise, but the woman he trusted most in the world had stolen it from both of us. How much? I asked Victoria. How much of my money did you take? She was quiet for a long moment. $36,000, she finally whispered. Plus a house that was probably worth at least $200,000 more. Victoria's family had been living like royalty on money meant to keep me from poverty. David stood slowly, his movements careful, controlled. Victoria, pack your things. I want you out of my house tonight. David, please, she begged, reaching for him. We can fix this. I'll make it right. I'll find a way to pay your mother back. He stepped away from her touch. With what money? You haven't worked a day since we got married. Everything you have, everything your family has been living on, was stolen from my mother. I watched my daughter-in-law collapse, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where trust used to be. She'd looked me in the eye for 2 years, sat at this very table, knowing I was struggling while her family lived in luxury at my expense. As Victoria's sobs echoed through my small dining room, I realized that this Thanksgiving would indeed be unforgettable. But not for the family gathering I'd hoped for. It would be remembered as the day I learned that sometimes the brightest smiles hide the darkest secrets. After Victoria left that night, her sobs and desperate pleas for forgiveness echoing into the cold night air, my house felt different. Quieter, but not peaceful. The silence was heavy, thick with unanswered questions, and the crushing weight of betrayal that seemed to settle into every corner. David wanted to call his lawyer immediately, but I held him back, not from any wavering of resolve, but from an instinct that we needed to unearth the full extent of Victoria's deceit. Thieves rarely steal just once. This, I suspected, went deeper. Mom, you don't need to do anything, David said, slumping across from me at my kitchen table, his expensive suit wrinkled from the long, awful day. Let me handle everything. You've been through enough. But I shook my head. For 2 years, I'd been Victoria's unknowing victim, helpless while she systematically stripped me of what little security I had. Now the truth was a raw, burning wound, but it was also a weapon. I wouldn't sit back. I need to see it all, I told him. Every document, every bank record, every piece of paperwork. I need to understand exactly what she did to me. The next morning, after David went home to change and gather documents, I called in sick for the first time in 2 years. Mrs. Henderson, my supervisor, was surprised but understanding when I spoke of a family emergency. If only she knew. David returned with boxes of paperwork and his laptop. We spread everything across my small dining table, the same table where Victoria had sat just hours before, playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law while meticulously concealing her crimes. The first document we examined was the deed to the lake house. My signature was there, stark and clear on a document I'd never seen. But as I stared, something seemed off. This isn't how I sign my name, I said, pointing. Look at the M in Margaret. I always make it with a little loop at the top, but this one is just straight lines. David pulled out his phone, snapped a picture, then found an old birthday card I'd signed for him. The differences were subtle, but undeniable once you knew what to look for. She forged your signature, he said, his voice flat with anger. We kept digging. Bank records showed the monthly payments had indeed gone into an account in my name, but at a bank I'd never used. Someone had opened an account using my personal information. "I need to see this account," I said. David called the bank, but they refused to give him information. He wasn't the account holder. So, we drove there together, my hands shaking as I walked into the marble lobby of First National Bank, clutching my driver's license and social security card. The account had been open 2 years, and 1 month ago, just weeks before the first payment was due. The address on file, 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B, the same address Rebecca had mentioned. The phone number wasn't mine either. "Ma'am," the bank representative said, scrolling through records with a confused expression. "You've never actually been in this branch before, have you?" "No," I said firmly. "Never in my life." She showed us the signature card from the account opening. The same fake version of my name, signed by someone who wasn't me. "This is identity theft," the representative said, her voice laced with concern. "You need to file a police report immediately." But we weren't done. David had brought copies of all his financial records related to my care. As we sat in the bank's customer service area, a more complete, horrifying picture began to emerge. The monthly payments were just the beginning. David had also sent additional money for my medical expenses, money I'd never seen. $500 for new glasses, $800 for supposed dental work, $1,000 last Christmas as a bonus. Every single payment had gone to the fake account. "How much?" I asked, dreading the answer. David's fingers moved over his phone's calculator. His face went pale. $43,000. Over 2 years, she stole $43,000 from you. I felt dizzy. $43,000 was more money than I'd ever had in my life. It was enough to have changed everything, to have given me security and comfort in my older years instead of the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck. We drove to 847 Maple Street. It was a rundown apartment complex on the other side of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and broken concrete steps. Apartment 2B was empty, a "for rent" sign in the window. "She probably rented it just long enough to establish the fake address," David said, his jaw tight with anger. But I was thinking about something else. David, how did she get my personal information? My social security number, my date of birth, all the details she'd need to open that account. He was quiet for a moment. "From our house. I keep copies of important family documents in my home office." She would have had access to everything. The betrayal cut deeper with each new revelation. Victoria hadn't just seized an opportunity. She planned this carefully, systematically stealing my identity and my money while living in my son's house, eating at his table, pretending to love him. That evening, as we sat in my living room, surrounded by the mounting evidence of Victoria's crimes, David looked at me, tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I trusted her completely. I never thought to verify that you were receiving the money because she was the one who suggested I send it in the first place." That detail hit me like ice water. "She suggested it." David nodded miserably. "About 6 months after Dad died, she mentioned how worried she was about you managing on your own. She said it would be a wonderful gesture if I could help with your expenses, especially since business was going so well. She even offered to coordinate with Rebecca to set everything up." I closed my eyes, feeling the full, crushing weight of Victoria's manipulation. She positioned herself as the caring daughter-in-law, concerned about her husband's struggling mother, while secretly ensuring every dollar meant for me ended up in her family's pockets. "And the lake house," David continued, "same thing. She said you'd mentioned wanting to live near water, that it would be good for your health and peace of mind. She helped me find the property, negotiated the price, handled all the paperwork. Victoria had played my son like a violin, using his love for me against both of us. She'd made him feel generous and caring while systematically robbing me of everything he tried to give. As David gathered the papers to take to his lawyer, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the walls I'd grown so intimately familiar with over the past 2 years. This small, cramped space with its old furniture and broken air conditioner wasn't supposed to be my reality. I was supposed to be living comfortably in a beautiful house by the lake, with enough money to buy my medications without counting pennies. Instead, Victoria's parents were probably sitting by that lake right now, enjoying their stolen retirement, while I'd been rationing my blood pressure pills and wearing secondhand clothes. But knowing the truth, as painful as it was, felt like the first step toward getting my life back. Victoria had stolen more than money. She'd stolen 2 years of security, of dignity, of the peace of mind that comes with knowing your child is taking care of you. Tomorrow, we'd start the process of getting it all back. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I went to bed knowing exactly where I stood. And that knowledge, bitter as it was, felt like power. The morning David's lawyer called with the results of his investigation, I was scrubbing floors at the office building where I'd worked for the past decade. My knees ached against the cold tile, and my hands were raw from the industrial cleaning solutions. But I kept working because I needed every dollar from this job. Or at least I thought I did. Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Patterson's voice was grim when I called him back during my lunch break. We need to meet immediately. What we've uncovered goes far beyond what we initially suspected. David picked me up after my shift, his face drawn with exhaustion. He'd barely slept since Thanksgiving, throwing himself into the investigation with the same intensity he brought to his business deals. But this wasn't business. This was personal, and it was destroying him. At the lawyer's office, we sat across from Mr. Patterson as he laid out a file thick with documents. Victoria didn't just steal from you, Mrs. Harrison. She's been running what amounts to a small-scale fraud operation using your identity. The room seemed to tilt as he explained. Victoria had used my personal information to open not just one bank account, but 3 separate accounts at different banks. She'd applied for credit cards in my name, taken out a small loan, and even filed false tax returns claiming me as a dependent while reporting income I'd never earned. The IRS has been trying to contact you about discrepancies in your tax filings, Mr. Patterson continued. They've been sending notices to the fake address. You're currently under investigation for tax evasion. I felt like I was drowning. Tax evasion. But I file my taxes honestly every year. We know that now, but the IRS doesn't. Victoria has been reporting that you received the money David sent. Money that you never actually got. From their perspective, you've been hiding income. David's hands were clenched into fists. How much did she steal in total? Mr. Patterson flipped through several pages, tallying the original $43,000, plus additional credit card spending, loan proceeds, and fraudulent tax refunds. We're looking at approximately $78,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $78,000. I made $18,000 a year scrubbing floors. Victoria had stolen more than 4 years of my salary. And the house, Mr. Patterson said. That's where it gets more complicated. The property is legally in your name, Mrs. Harrison, based on the forged deed. Victoria's family has been living there, making improvements with the stolen money, and they've actually increased the property value significantly. I thought about Victoria's parents, whom I'd met only twice. They'd seemed like nice people, a little overwhelmed by their daughter's wealthy lifestyle, but grateful for her success. Had they known where the money was coming from? Had they known they were living in a house stolen from their son-in-law's mother? Can we get it back? David asked. Yes, but we'll need to involve law enforcement. This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. Victoria could face serious prison time. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who'd sat at my table just days ago, crying and begging for forgiveness. She'd seemed genuinely remorseful. But now, I wondered if those tears had been real or just another manipulation. What about her family? I asked. Her parents, her brother with the children? Mr. Patterson's expression was sympathetic but firm. They'll have to vacate the property. If they can prove they didn't know the money was stolen, they might avoid criminal charges, but they can't keep what was bought with fraudulent funds. David was staring out the window, his jaw tight. Where is Victoria now? She's staying with her parents at the lake house, Mr. Patterson said. Our investigator confirmed she's been there since she left your house on Thanksgiving. So, she ran straight to the people who'd been living off my mother's stolen money, David said bitterly. Of course she did. That afternoon, we drove to Lake Morrison. I'd never seen the house that was supposedly mine. As we pulled into the long driveway, I gasped despite myself. It was beautiful, a sprawling ranch-style home with large windows overlooking the water, surrounded by mature trees and well-maintained gardens. This was what David had intended for me. This peaceful, comfortable place, where I could have spent my retirement years watching the sunset over the lake, instead of worrying about whether I could afford my next meal. Victoria's father answered the door, his face falling when he saw David and me. Oh, he said quietly. We've been expecting you. Victoria appeared behind him, looking smaller and younger than I'd ever seen her. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and an old sweater, and her face was puffy from crying. Margaret, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I looked at her, this woman who'd smiled at me across countless dinner tables while systematically destroying my financial security, and I felt nothing but cold anger. Are you? I asked. Are you really sorry, Victoria? Or are you just sorry you got caught? She started crying again, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen her tears before, had believed in them. Had even felt sorry for her sometimes when David worked long hours and she seemed lonely. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. It started with just borrowing the first payment to help my parents with their mortgage. You were going to put it back before anyone noticed, but you didn't, David said, his voice like ice. You took more and more. You stole my mother's identity, filed false tax returns, opened credit cards in her name. That's not borrowing, Victoria. That's fraud. Victoria's mother had appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. We didn't know, she said desperately. We thought David was just being generous, helping us through a difficult time. Victoria told us he'd insisted on buying us the house. I looked at this older woman, probably close to my age, and I saw genuine shock and horror in her eyes. She hadn't known. None of them had known except Victoria. The IRS thinks I'm a tax cheat because of what your daughter did, I said quietly. I could go to prison because Victoria filed false returns in my name. Victoria's mother gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Oh my God, Victoria, what have you done? But Victoria just kept crying, offering excuses and apologies that meant nothing now. She'd had 2 years to confess, 2 years to make this right, and she'd chosen to dig deeper instead. Mr. Patterson stepped forward with a briefcase full of legal documents. Mrs. Stevens, I'm going to need you and your family to vacate this property within 30 days. Everything purchased with the fraudulent funds will need to be returned or compensated for. As I watched Victoria's family absorb the reality of their situation, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just relief that the truth was finally out in the open. The police will be here tomorrow to arrest Victoria, Mr. Patterson continued. I'd recommend she turn herself involuntarily. Victoria looked up at David with desperate eyes. Please don't let them arrest me. I'll pay everything back. I promise. I'll get a job. I'll work day and night. David shook his head sadly. With what skills, Victoria? You've never worked a day in your life. You don't even know how to work. All you know how to do is take. As we left the lake house, I turned back for one last look at the place that should have been my home for the past 2 years. Soon it would be, but it felt hollow now, tainted by the knowledge of how Victoria had stolen it from me. Mom, David said as we drove away, I'm going to make sure you never want for anything again. I'm going to take care of you the way I should have been doing all along. I patted his hand gently. You were taking care of me, honey. It's not your fault that Victoria stole what you gave me. But as we drove back toward my small, cramped house, I knew that everything was about to change. Victoria would face the consequences of her crimes, and I would finally get the security and comfort that David had always intended for me to have. The confrontation was over. Now came justice. The divorce papers were finalized on a gray Tuesday in February, 3 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. I sat in the courthouse hallway beside David as his lawyer emerged from the courtroom with news that Victoria had signed everything without contest. She'd already been sentenced to 18 months in prison for fraud and identity theft. Fighting the divorce would have only added legal fees she couldn't afford. It's done, Mr. Patterson said, sitting down beside us. The marriage is dissolved. All assets purchased with stolen funds revert to their rightful owners. Mrs. Harrison, you now legally own the lake house, and all the money in the fraudulent accounts has been frozen pending full restitution. David let out a long breath. What about her family? They vacated the property last week. Her parents moved in with her brother temporarily, and they've been surprisingly cooperative. I think they're genuinely horrified by what Victoria did. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that this nightmare was finally ending, but sadness for the collateral damage. Victoria's parents were innocent victims, too, in their own way. They'd lost their home and their savings, all because their daughter had chosen to steal instead of asking for help. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork and adjustments. David threw himself into making things right with the same intensity he'd once brought to building his business. He hired a team of accountants to untangle Victoria's fraudulent tax filings, worked with the IRS to clear my name, and personally oversaw every detail of transferring ownership of the lake house back to me. But the most important change was in David himself. The successful businessman, who'd been too busy for regular phone calls, became a son who stopped by every few days, who called just to check on me, who insisted on taking me to doctor's appointments and grocery shopping. You don't have to hover, honey, I told him one afternoon as he helped me pack the few belongings I wanted to keep from my old house. I'm not going anywhere. He paused, folding one of my quilts, his hand stilling on the soft fabric. Mom, I missed 2 years of your life because I was stupid enough to trust Victoria completely. I'm not missing any more. I understood his guilt, even though I didn't think he deserved it. Victoria had been a master manipulator, playing on his love for me to hide her crimes. But I also understood that trust, once broken so completely, takes time to rebuild, even trust in yourself. Moving into the lake house felt surreal. The place was beautiful, but it carried the heavy weight of everything that had happened. Victoria's family had taken good care of it, I had to admit. The gardens were well maintained, the house was clean and updated, and they'd even added a screened porch overlooking the water that I fell in love with immediately. But it felt like moving into someone else's life rather than reclaiming my own. "We can change anything you want," David said as we walked through the rooms together. "New furniture, different paint colors, whatever would make it feel like home to you." I appreciated his thoughtfulness, but I wasn't sure new curtains would erase the knowledge that Victoria's father had sat in this living room for 2 years, reading his morning paper while I'd been rationing my medication 50 miles away. The financial restitution process was more complex than I'd expected. The accounts Victoria had opened in my name contained not just the money David had sent, but also funds from the credit cards she'd used and the loan she'd taken out. Untangling what belonged to whom required forensic accounting and months of documentation. "The good news," my new financial advisor explained, "is that when all is said and done, you'll have not just the original money your son sent, but also accumulated interest and some additional compensation for the identity theft. We're looking at approximately $95,000 once everything is recovered." $95,000. I'd never imagined having that kind of money. It was enough to live comfortably for years, to never worry about choosing between groceries and medication again, to actually enjoy my retirement instead of working until my body gave out. But the money felt strange in my hands, tainted by the knowledge of how it had been stolen and recovered. I found myself almost missing the simplicity of my old life, where I knew exactly where I stood, even if that place was barely getting by. The hardest part was dealing with the community's reaction. In a town the size of ours, Victoria's arrest and trial had been front-page news. Everyone knew what she'd done, and by extension, everyone knew that I'd been the victim of an elaborate fraud scheme. People's reactions varied wildly. Some were sympathetic, offering help and expressing outrage on my behalf. Others seemed almost suspicious, as if they couldn't believe I hadn't known what was happening. A few made comments that suggested they thought I should be grateful for the attention, as if being defrauded was somehow better than being ignored. The worst were the people who acted like I'd won the lottery instead of having my identity stolen. "Well, at least it all worked out in the end," one neighbor said cheerfully. "Now you're sitting pretty by the lake." I wanted to shake them, to explain that having your daughter-in-law systematically steal your identity and rob you for 2 years isn't something that just works out. That the money and the house came with the knowledge that someone you trusted had viewed you as nothing more than a source of funds to exploit. But I kept my mouth shut and focused on rebuilding my life. The first night I spent alone in the lake house, I sat on the screened porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset over the water. The view was beautiful, peaceful in a way I'd never experienced before, but I felt oddly detached from it, as if I were a guest in someone else's dream. My phone rang, and David's name appeared on the screen. He'd been calling every night since I'd moved in, checking to make sure I was settling in okay. "How are you feeling, Mom?" I looked out at the lake, trying to find words for the complicated mix of emotions churning inside me. "Grateful," I said finally, and sad and angry and confused, sometimes all at the same time. "That sounds about right," David said softly. "You know, I've been thinking about what Victoria said that last day, about how she never meant for it to go so far." I remembered her tears, her desperate apologies. "What about it?" "I think she was telling the truth about that part. I think she really did start small and then couldn't stop. But that doesn't make it better, does it? If anything, it makes it worse. She had dozens of opportunities to confess, to make it right, and she chose to dig deeper every single time." He was right. Victoria's initial crime might have been impulse or desperation, but everything that followed had been calculated deception. She'd looked me in the eye at family dinners, had hugged me at holidays, had listened to me worry about money, all while knowing she was the reason I was struggling. "I keep thinking about how proud she seemed," I said, when she talked about her family's renovations to the house, the improvements they were making. She was proud of what they had accomplished with my stolen money. "She wasn't just stealing from you, Mom. She was stealing from both of us. She stole the relationship we should have had these past 2 years. The peace of mind I thought I was giving you." After I hung up with David, I walked through the house that was finally, legally, undeniably mine. It was beautiful, comfortable, everything I could have wanted, but it would take time before it felt like home instead of evidence of a crime. I settled into the master bedroom that night, in a bed that was mine, in a house that was mine, with enough money in the bank to last me the rest of my life. I should have felt triumphant, Instead, I felt exhausted. But as I drifted off to sleep to the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore, I realized that exhaustion wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was the exhaustion that comes after a long, difficult journey is finally over. Tomorrow, I could begin the work of making this stolen dream into something that truly belonged to me. 1 year later, I stood on the same screen porch where I'd spent that first confused night. But everything had changed. The space that had once felt foreign now wrapped around me like a comfortable embrace. I'd replaced Victoria's family's furniture with pieces that spoke to me, added plants that I'd chosen myself, and hung photos that told the story of my real life rather than someone else's stolen dream. The morning routine I developed had become sacred to me. Coffee on the porch as the sun came up over the lake, watching the water change colors with the light. It was a luxury I'd never imagined I'd have, this peace, this time to simply exist without the constant weight of financial worry. David's car pulled into the driveway right on schedule for our weekly breakfast together. This tradition had started months ago, after his initial guilt-driven hovering had settled into something more natural. We'd both learned to navigate this new relationship, one built on honesty rather than the false foundation Victoria had created. "Morning, Mom," he called as he came through the front door, carrying a bag from the bakery in town. "I brought those cinnamon rolls you like." I smiled, setting 2 plates on the kitchen table. "You don't have to bring me pastries every week, honey. I'm perfectly capable of feeding myself now." He grinned. "I know you are, but I like bringing them. Besides, Mrs. Chan at the bakery always asks about you. Half the town has adopted you as their favorite success story." It was true. The same community that had whispered about my situation during Victoria's trial had embraced me once justice was served. People stopped me at the grocery store to ask how I was settling in. Neighbors brought casseroles when I first moved to the lake, and the mailman made sure to mention whenever he had good news to deliver. "Any word from the lawyer about Victoria's appeal?" I asked as we settled into our usual spots. David shook his head. "Her public defender filed the paperwork, but Mr. Patterson says it's basically a formality. The evidence was too overwhelming, and she pleaded guilty to everything. She'll serve her full sentence." 18 months had seemed such a short time when the judge announced it. But as the seasons changed and my new life took shape, I'd stopped thinking about Victoria's timeline and started focusing on my own. "How do you feel about that?" David asked, studying my face carefully. I considered the question seriously. A year ago, I might have wanted Victoria to suffer more, to face consequences that matched the scale of what she'd stolen from me. But now, sitting in the house that was truly mine, with money in the bank and my son's genuine attention, revenge felt less important than it once had. "I feel like she's where she needs to be," I said finally. "Not because I want her to suffer, but because she needs to face real consequences for what she did. Maybe prison will teach her something that our family never could." Through the legal process, I'd learned more about Victoria's psychology than I'd ever wanted to know. When she married David, she'd suddenly had access to wealth she'd never imagined. But apparently, it hadn't been enough. She'd needed to feel like she was the provider, the one who could solve her family's problems. The therapist her lawyer recommended says she has something called entitlement syndrome. David had told me months ago. She genuinely believed she deserved whatever she could take because life had been unfair to her. I'd thought about that explanation for a long time. Life had been unfair to me, too, when I'd lost my husband and found myself struggling to make ends meet. But I'd never considered that unfairness gave me the right to steal from others. "Have you heard anything about her family?" I asked. David nodded. Her parents moved to Arizona to live with her aunt. Her brother found a job in another state. They're starting over. Basically, I felt a pang of sympathy for them. Victoria's crimes had destroyed more lives than just mine. Her parents had lost their home and their savings. Her brother's children had been uprooted from their schools and friends, all because Victoria had chosen theft over honesty. "I've been thinking about writing them a letter," I said. David's eyebrows rose. "Really? What would you say?" "That I don't blame them. That I hope they're doing okay." I paused, stirring sugar into my coffee. Victoria made her choices, but they didn't deserve to pay for them. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, looking out at the lake. A family of ducks had taken up residence near the shore, and I'd gotten into the habit of tossing them breadcrumbs for my morning toast. Simple pleasures that I'd never had time for when every moment was consumed with survival. "I have something to tell you," David said eventually, his tone shifting to something more serious. I looked at him expectantly. "I've been seeing someone, a woman I met at a business conference. Her name is Jennifer, and she's nothing like Victoria." I felt a flutter of anxiety, then forced myself to relax. "Tell me about her." "She's a forensic accountant, actually. She helps companies investigate financial irregularities. She knows what Victoria did, knows the whole story, and she's not interested in my money. She makes good money of her own. I smiled. A forensic accountant. That seems appropriate. David laughed. I thought you'd appreciate the irony. She's also incredibly honest, sometimes brutally so. She told me on our third date that she thought I was too trusting and needed to work on my boundaries. Smart woman. When do I get to meet her? Only if you want to. I'm not rushing anything this time. I'm learning to trust my own judgment again, and part of that means not seeking approval from everyone else before I know how I feel myself. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you for taking your time, but when you're ready, I'd love to meet her. After David left, I took my usual walk around the property. The gardens that Victoria's family had planted were thriving under my care, but I'd added my own touches. A vegetable patch where I grew tomatoes and herbs, a reading nook under the old oak tree, a bird feeder that attracted cardinals and blue jays. The house was becoming mine in ways that had nothing to do with legal ownership. It was filled with my choices, my memories, my quiet daily routines that no one could steal or forge or manipulate. That afternoon, I did something I'd been planning for weeks. I called my old supervisor at the cleaning company, Mrs. Henderson. This is Margaret Harrison. I wanted to let you know that I won't be coming back to work. There was a pause. Are you feeling all right, Margaret? You've been out quite a while now. I'm feeling better than I have in years, I said, smiling at the truth of it. I am retiring. It felt strange to say the word. I'd never imagined I'd be able to retire. Had assumed I'd work until my body gave out. But the money Victoria had stolen, and that had been recovered, combined with a house and David's ongoing support, meant I could finally stop scrubbing other people's floors and start living for myself. That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Jennifer wants to know if you like Italian food. She's thinking of cooking for you next weekend. I typed back. Tell her I love Italian food, but she doesn't need to impress me. I already like anyone who makes my son happy. As darkness settled over the water, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. Tired, struggling, proud, but quietly desperate. She would never have believed that this peace was possible. This sense of security and contentment. Victoria had stolen 2 years of my life. But in a strange way, her crimes had also given me something I might never have had otherwise. They'd forced David to truly see me, to understand that I needed more than just financial support. I needed his presence, his attention, his genuine care. They'd also taught me something about my own strength. I'd survived the theft, the investigation, the trial, the complicated process of reclaiming my identity in my life. I'd learned that I was tougher than I'd given myself credit for, more resilient than I'd ever needed to be before. I'd also learned something about forgiveness. Not forgiveness for Victoria, who would have to earn that through genuine change that I might never witness, but forgiveness for myself for being trusting enough to believe in her lies. And forgiveness for David, who'd been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had been. As I locked up the house and headed to bed, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a day well lived in a life reclaimed. Tomorrow would bring new small pleasures, new quiet joys, new moments of peace that no one could steal. The lake house that had started as Victoria's crime scene had become my sanctuary. The money that had been stolen and recovered had become my security. The son who had been deceived into neglecting me had become my devoted companion. Victoria had tried to steal my future, but in the end, she'd only delayed it. Now it was mine, fully and completely, to live exactly as I chose. And I chose peace. Now I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. Where are you watching from? Comment your city, so I can see how far my story has reached.